I hereby introduce to you Mr. Michael Veazey.
Welcome back to New Year's resolutions, part 2 of what I'm not going to do in 2017, or rather my stop doing list rather than my start doing list. So the next thing on the list after giving up products that are unprofitable or simply don't sell is to think about the marketplaces that you might stop selling in as well. So certain marketplaces are going to be better for certain products than others. For example, if you're trying to sell outdoors sort of barbecue equipment in the UK right now, given that it's January and it's freezing cold, there will be a few hardened people like myself that wander around in shirts. Well, it's like 5 degrees C, but most, and if you're American, God knows what that is in Fahrenheit. I'm sorry, it must be 45, 50, something like that. But most of the time that's going to hold true. So selling barbecue products in January, probably not an amazing thing to do, but it depends on the country, right? So certain marketplaces for certain products and at certain times are not going to work out. So it could be that you try and sell you sell a product in one marketplace, it does really well. You try it in another marketplace, it simply doesn't take off. Now you should do the right things. You make sure you dial in your pay-per-click, and your keyword research needs to be specific to each marketplace. Don't just be lazy and take over what you already have, because it can work quite differently, especially if you're an American seller or if you're a British seller but selling in the US, bringing products to the UK. Do not assume that the keywords that people use are the same. They often aren't, okay? They talk about 2 countries divided by a common language, and that certainly can be true with keywords. Sometimes it's the same, sometimes it's different. And assume nothing, research everything, and you'll be fine. But even after you've done that, and if you've done your pay-per-click campaigns properly, and you've done a launch properly and all the rest of it, and how to do launches in 2017 is another question, but I'll be addressing that over the coming weeks. I'll be getting some experts in to deal with that if you're worrying about that. But nevertheless, assume you have some form of your launch that you can do now. Basically, sometimes after all of that, your product just isn't taking off. And at that point, I would certainly not necessarily kill it completely, but I would just pause that listing and sell through the inventory maybe. But if it really isn't working, then I certainly wouldn't reorder that product in a hurry. So sometimes it can be that case very simply that here's a couple of classic kind of patterns you'll probably see if you sell in the US and in Europe. So I had a product in UK which sold okay. It sold about 5 units a day if I got to the top of page 1 for the main keyword, but it was reasonably profitable, so it was worth doing. Now I've sort of stopped doing that product for a while because I wanted to allocate my cash to other things which made more sense, but I'll probably revisit that product at some point if it makes sense. But the same product in the USA sold like gangbusters, but because it was fairly generic, i.e. it was, let's say it was a blue widget rather than a blue black widget, yeah? Then, sorry, that doesn't make sense, does it? A blue plastic widget as opposed to a blue stainless steel widget, right? So let's say it was a common or garden blue plastic widget, which is called blue widget. Okay, you get the idea, fairly generic product. So in the US, it sold like gangbusters because the demand was good, but only at a certain price point. If I upped the price point, it disappeared down to page 5 and the sales volume dropped off. At that price point, it simply wasn't profitable. Now, maybe I could, sell that product there at a lower sales volume and a higher price point. Possibly I abandoned it too soon. But broadly speaking, I was able to allocate that capital and that energy into something, as I've shared in another podcast, that was a niche version of that product. So like blue widget stainless steel, which is doing much, much better. Now, same 2 products in the UK, the blue widget generically did okay. Wasn't that exciting? So that's why I took my capital away. It wasn't a great success, nor was it a great failure. There was the blue widget stainless steel, the exact one that has just sold about 1,200 units in 6 weeks at about 25-30% profit margin in the US. In the UK, we're selling about 1 a day. And it was on page 1. It was about 6th to 10th position roughly on page 1. So below the fold, to be fair, but it simply wasn't, it was profitable, but it wasn't really selling a great deal. And if I if I could drive the sales ranking up by lowering the price, then it wouldn't be profitable anymore. So it kind of stabilized at about 1 to 2 units a day. So for me, that just wasn't worth the time and effort to keep working on, because again, it was a distraction from other things and an allocation of capital to something that wasn't doing what it should do over time. Once you try the product out, I would aim to be making return on investment of about 40% within about 3-month period. At Christmas, maybe within 6 weeks. In the dead time of year, so January time, maybe I would allow 4 or 5 months for that. But that's broadly what I'm aiming at, and over time I want to see my products achieve that, and if they don't, I will strongly consider reallocating capital to something else, especially if I have some data. So there's 2 examples of how one product can behave differently in different marketplaces, and certain products are worth pursuing in certain marketplaces. So the generic type product for me in the US wasn't worth pursuing because it wasn't profitable. It was kind of worth pursuing in the UK because it was profitable, but the sales running was low. And then the more niche down version sold like crazy in America, because in America the demand is so high for some products, for a lot of products, because it is the biggest Amazon marketplace in the world, of course, by a large margin. Something like 3 times the size of Europe marketplaces combined. So in the UK, unsurprisingly, the demand just wasn't worth having it in. So there's an example of when it's not so much giving up a marketplace, but giving up a specific product in a specific marketplace can sometimes be the right option. And I would certainly encourage you, again, to do your numbers and be led by the facts rather than what you wish were the case. Just because you've invested time and money and energy in it, and I'll say this again because it's so important, if you get emotionally attached to something in business, that's understandable, and that can give you the follow through something to the point where it will begin to take off. So I'm not suggesting you abandon things that easily necessarily, right? But at some point, you definitely have to go, the numbers are in, the facts are in, we can try tweaking the market, tweak. Yes, you should try different things. You should not give up on a product easily if you've invested time and energy and money in it. But on the other hand, if something else is selling easily, you should move that capital. So it's capital allocation. At the end of the day, you need to put your capital as well as your sweat equity, as they put it, your time and focus into something that is going to produce the right kind of result for you. So again, be hard-hearted, don't be foolish, don't be hasty, but be rational about it. Don't decide things based on you and your effort. Decide things based on the market and your consumers above all, and your consumers and their choices between you and your competition. That is the only rational way ultimately to build a business. We'll keep going with our giving up list. It sounds a bit depressing, guys, but actually giving things up can be a relief because you stop pouring time and energy into something which your heart of hearts you knew was a waste of time and energy. Next up, we're going to talk about the other big money sink which you need to be careful with, which is sponsored ads and generally paid advertising.